we're going to talk about how to draw the human figure, and we're going to spend a lot of attention now on making sure we understand all these proportions here, okay? So I've got my paper here ready to go. I've got my cheat sheet here, which if you are a beginner, I definitely recommend that you have some kind of reference guide to help you remember those. You got to see it, ingrain it in your vision, so you get a sense, and you help to develop that sense of what works and what doesn't work. And I got my handy skeleton here to kind of illustrate how it all kind of fits together, okay? So the first thing you've got to understand is, well, I'm going to use a Conte crayon here because I like how well it's going to show up on camera so you can see it really well. And it's kind of a nice in-between working with charcoal and colored pencil. So I really like to work with these here, okay? So we are not going to use an eraser. This is not going to be something exact and something super pretty. We're just sketching it out, okay? So a couple things I'm going to try to point out as we go along that I think are really important that you need to remember as we're doing this, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is start off drawing this vertical line here, really kind of light. Try to get it somewhat straight. It's hard when I draw from the side here, but I'll try to get the best I can, okay? And the reason why we do this is to help make sure that I keep everything symmetrical, okay? It looks a little, let's see. Yeah, it looks a little better. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is start off with, I like to start off with the head. I know there's lots of different ways to do this. You've got to find out what works best for you. When I hold my pencil, I like to hold it back here so I get an even movement with my pencil. I don't draw like this. I want to hold my pencil back further, and that just helps to get a more fluid and a descriptive line than if you go like that, okay? So you want to hold back on your pencil. When you draw from your shoulder. I don't move my wrist very much. I move more my shoulder and my elbow as I draw. And a lot of artists will do this. And so to get kind of an idea of what I'm going to draw, you can see I take my pencil and just kind of hover it over my piece of paper. This kind of helps me to kind of see the movement of what the stroke is going to be like before I put it on the paper and before I commit to anything, okay? So ideally, you always draw really light, and artists never get it right the first time. You always are going to make little adjustments here and there, unless you've been doing it for years. Then you get it right the first time. But I do not get it right the first time. So I'm going to start off by just going really kind of lightly and sketching in here the shape of the head. Okay, it is kind of an oval shape here, and you can see I'm making several lines until I get comfortable with about the right size and the right shape. Then I can push harder to make it more defined. Okay, do you see that little movement there? Okay, now this is going to be really important because the first shape you draw is called the basic unit. This is what we're going to use to determine the shape of the entire body. Okay, this goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. They set these rules, and we've kind of followed it ever since on what the ideal figure or how it's all laid out, okay? So, and it's all based upon the dimensions of the head. Now, they've described it as 8 heads tall. Ideally, most people are not 8 heads tall, but the rule that we learn is 8 heads, and then you can make adjustments once you learn those rules. So first, we're going to cover the rules. Once you learn the rules, like I said, you can make adjustments to get it to look more like the model that you're trying to draw. But when you're first starting out, don't obsess over that doesn't look like the model, okay? That comes with lots and lots of practice, and there's no there's no secret tricks to get it to look like the model other than just to build up that skill and be able to see the detail enough to get it to look like the model. So for right now, your big concern is only going to be, is it proportionate? Does it follow those 8 heads, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this measurement here, and we're going to repeat this, okay? So I'm going to take my finger here, and I've marked it off with the tip of my pencil and with my thumb to figure out what that measurement is. And then I bring that down. So my next mark is right there. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, right there. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? Now the fourth measurement, that's halfway. That's our halfway point. this is going to be marked the base of the hips or the groin. Okay, so so that's the halfway mark there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 is down here. Okay, that is how far my figure is going to go. Okay, so to help us see this, I'm going to take my ruler here, kind of draw this out. Now I can see I got this a little bit crooked here, so I'm going to adjust that. There, that's a little bit better. So you guys are going to follow along with me. Okay? You're going to follow along with me and just basically do what I do. I'm going to do it kind of fast, just so that the video is not forever and doesn't take so long. But you can pause this at any point to get caught up. Okay? So I'm just going to go and I'm just going to keep talking. And if I'm going too fast for you to keep up, then just pause the video so you don't have to get behind. Okay, that's a little bit better. I said I wasn't going to erase, but I just erased that. Okay, so I'm sorry. Okay, so to get that idea, now when you look at this, students always say there's no way. That is way too big. There's no way. That head looks really, really small. And when you lay it out this way, it does look very, very small. But I promise you, once we get it all laid in, it's going to feel right. So people have a tendency to shortchange the legs, the arms, tend to be way too short. And so I want you to get in the habit of counting these over here. And to kind of see this, I'm going to also draw over here on the side my 8 heads. This will give you a little bit of practice drawing that shape there, but also to help you visualize the 8 heads and how it all fits. Okay, so got my 8 heads stacked over on the side there. Now, so the first thing you do to start is the position of the head. You want to find the angle of the head as well. And since we're drawn just straight forward, just like Mr. Skeleton over here, this is Mr. Bones. And so I'm going to start with the head, okay? The first thing I look for, and I pay attention, I kind of work my way down from the head, okay? So the first thing I look for is this little position right here of where the neck comes in, okay? Or where the neck joins with the head here. And you get this little divot right here between the 2 clavicle bones that is really easy to spot and helps you define that position as well. And that's typically 1/3 of the way down on the second head here. So you have to kind of estimate about 1/3 of the way down. Then I'm going to draw in my neck shape. Okay? Now, I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I'm going to do 1/2 female, 1/2 male, so it's going to look a little different from side to side because there are some subtle differences that can make your figure look more masculine or more feminine, okay? So typically, if you're doing a more feminine approach, then you're going to have a slimmer neck. So maybe it's going to come in here a little bit instead of out here on a man, okay? So then the next thing I look for is the bottom of the second head here, okay? So the bottom of the second head here typically lines up with the middle of the chest, okay? Or I should say typically the nipples of the figure, okay? If you look at your little cheat sheet here, the second head is right here. So I look for this little shape right here, okay? So it usually kind of comes in a little bit. And then on a man, it's kind of boxy like this. So think of like your superhero. Okay, and again, I'm going to sketch this out really lightly to give me kind of an idea of what that's going to look like. Okay, And before I finish this out, the other thing I want to mention too is that typically you got to keep in mind, how wide do you go? Okay, so the general rule of thumb is the average person, if you were to stack heads here, take the same head drawing here, if I were to put it right here, that's how wide a man's shoulder is going to be, okay? On a female, it's not nearly quite so wide, and so there's a little bit of an overlap here. So the head's going to kind of tuck in more behind it. Okay, so the average woman's shoulder is going to be more like that. Okay, it's usually about 2.5 heads. I'm doing about 2, a little bit more than the 2 on this side over here. Okay, just to give you kind of an idea. The next shape I look for when I'm drawing this is the shape of the rib cage. Okay, so I have kind of an idea of where the chest is. I need to know how big it's going to be. But then you also look at the rib cage, makes a very distinctive shape. Okay, so it curves out as you get more towards the bottom of the rib cage over here. And so I want to look for this distinctive shape as well. So I can see that if I follow this edge here, it comes off from the bottom of the neck, just slightly above the sternum here. And it's going to curve down. Oops. About like that on both sides. Okay, so here is the shape of the rib cage here. Now it goes up because you get this archway that kind of comes up here. Okay, so that's the basic shape of the rib cage there. And this gives you kind of an idea of the size as well. So the bottom of the ribs technically is a little bit low here, but I like to draw it down a little bit. The ribs will technically end about right there. I'll bring it down a little bit because you have, of course, your muscles down over here, which bring it down a little bit more. So I typically look for the bottom of the rib cage down at the bottom of the the third head down, okay, is about the bottom. Then I can kind of map out the rest of my chest here on the guy. You can see at this point here, it makes this wonderful little T, okay? This is always perpendicular. So as you're looking for the drawing and looking at, depending on the angle of the rib cage, you want to look for this shape here. You can see it goes down, okay? No matter whatever position, this can go up a little bit, but this always makes this little T. So you want to look for this little T shape here. Okay, because that is going to help you with the shoulders, the dimensions of the shoulders. Okay, now if you're drawing a guy, the shoulder is about, or I should say the shoulder muscle here, your deltoids, are much larger on a man than on a woman. Okay, men have broader shoulders. Women do not have as broad of shoulders. So that muscle won't be clearly as defined, which also gives them the appearance of having longer necks. And that's mostly because this muscle here is not as pronounced. And so the neck looks longer here. But men will typically have a much larger muscle in the back there that makes their necks look shorter, but it makes their necks look thicker. And of course, it gives them a different shape here. Now, for a man's chest here, I'll make this very pronounced here, but on a woman's chest, you want to curve it out, of course, and not make it as angular as you draw it in. Okay? So the next point now is to kind of move, again, moving our way down. We're going to go the arms after we get the legs put in too. Okay? The most important part is getting this torso area in. Okay? So as I mentioned before, the midpoint of the body is at the base of the crotch here. So this is always a little difficult and tricky to draw. because it's hard to see, because if your artist is, or your model is clothed, it's hard to see any bone features, and the bone features don't really describe it very well either. So I typically look for, it's often described as a bowl shape. So I'm going to mark here kind of the base of the groin, and then about halfway up here, I'm going to draw this oval here to describe the waist. So if you look at the mannequin here, you can see this, the hip bone creates kind of a bowl shape, okay? And it's like tilting or tipping forward. So it has this very strong angle forward, which I'll do a profile view over here so you can see that as well. Okay, so your hip bone is made by these two, or is defined, I should say, by these two large, it's about like a quarter circle bone structure here. It's called the iliac crest that kind of angles forward. And so when I draw the hips, I draw them so that if you can imagine that this bowl is kind of tipping forward, okay, and then comes up and connects up over here. Okay, the abs in through here, I typically don't worry about those. They can vary, of course, on your models and their personal physique here. But typically, this is left open, and you can fill that in later when you're doing some detail work. Okay, but again, it depends on male or female, because it's a little bit different. Okay, now on a male model, the hips are a little bit differently. The male hip joins down here. Okay? The female hip joins a little bit higher than that, because the hips are shaped differently in order to, of course, to have children, and that's going to affect how wide the hips are. Okay? So you want to kind of look for that, make it a little bit higher up over here where the bone comes in. Okay? Now, when you're drawing the legs, okay, I will start with a start point and an end point. So typically, to get the proportion down, the knee is going to come just above this line right here. Okay, you have this kneecap here. Okay, and it's the same on a woman's body over here. The knee is going to be just above this line right here, okay? So if you keep in mind, the thigh itself is going to be, if you count, you bump this up here to match those two lines, it's about 2 heads long if you're looking down at the thigh, okay? So that's something you want to keep in mind as well. And when you're drawing the shapes of the legs or the arms, I like to make it as a cylinder, okay? So you got to think of like a round cylinder. Let's see if I can do it. Well, I'll just do it over here. So it's going to come over here. I'm going to start off with this oval, but the cylinder is going to kind of taper down as it gets down closer to the knee. Okay, so it kind of bulges slightly here at the middle, and it's hard to draw sideways here, but it tapers down as it gets closer to the knee. Okay. On the female side over here, you can see this angles up quite a bit higher, and then tapers down as well. Which gives women wider hips. Okay? Narrower shoulders, wider hips. Men is opposite of that. Wider shoulders, narrower hips. Then it can bring this down. Okay? Another reason why I like to draw the arms and legs as these cylinders right here is it helps me to remember that they are three-dimensional form, and it makes it a lot easier when you're trying to draw something that's coming at you. Okay? If you can think of them as a cylindrical form. Okay? So that's the length of the knees, comes up to the bottom here. Okay? To draw the lower part of the leg, we're going to start I've got my starting point here at the knees, and then the stopping point is going to be here at the ankles, which is about, we're going to make that right here in the middle, about halfway up of the last head. So there's my start point, there's my stop point, so I get the angle, and now I'm going to make that a cylinder as well. The lower leg also has a bulge to it. You have your calf muscles here, which create kind of a bulging in the middle, called an entasis. You can do the same over here on this side. Okay, but try to think of them as 3D forms all the time. Okay, now feet can be really tricky, and that's going to be something that, of course, you can spend some time later on to get the details, but we're just working with simplified shapes, and so when I draw a figure, this is how I start. Okay, so if you're drawing the foot straight on, I just try to reduce it to just a simple kind of a flipper shape, like if you're wearing flippers. The toes come out a little bit further towards the out, and then you have your big toe, let's say right here, okay? But that's basically what I look for. When you're looking at straight on, you really can't see any of its distinctive shape, so it looks kind of funny. But if you're drawing it from the side, of course, you can see its distinctive shape a little bit better, okay? And typically, the foot is about 3/4 the size of the head, okay? Okay, so that's it, kind of turned to the side a little bit. Okay, now before we go into the arms, I want to do a little bit of profile view because the body looks completely different when you try to do a profile view. So I'm going to turn Mr. Bones here to the side. And as you can see, there's this lovely curve, and this is what makes the body such an interesting subject, is because it's this wonderful series of counterbalances that displace the forces and the weight and gives you all the cool things that your body can do. So when you're drawing your blank, your basic unit here from the side, I'm going to do this really quickly here on this side over here. You can see the head shape is a little bit different. It has a slight angle this way, okay? It's not straight up and down. The point is not directly in the middle. It's kicked out to the side over here. So you've got to create that shape here as well. So I look for this angle right here, okay? So to counterbalance this forward weight, because it's heavy here, you notice the neck has a slight curve this way to balance that, okay? So now if I transfer this over here, I can see the base of my neck. It's going to follow the same curve here, okay, like that. Okay, bring the shoulders over. Join the neck with the shoulder back here, okay? And then you get this. The rib cage also makes this similar angle that the head does. Okay, you can see the rib cage also has a thrust forward on the bottom here. So I want to look for that as well, okay? Because you got a thrust or an angle this way, an angle this way. So now, because we went this way, now we're going to go this way again. So I'm going to look for the same kind of angle here. Okay, so I look for the shape of the rib cages here. Okay, which again balances that out here. If I put the pectoral muscles in, you can see they're great big muscles that help to even that out a little bit. They connect right over here to the arm. Okay, Now to balance this, I'm going to go this direction now because you can see the curve of the spine here creates this beautiful little S pattern that creates this balance that kind of comes down and curves out here. Okay, so from the side view, you can see the bowl shape here. So there's your bowl. The hip joined right about here, okay? And then the knee is going to be right down here. So if I make my the thigh, if I block in the thigh right here, you have some really big muscles on this part of the leg in front, which makes them curve a little bit this way, okay? So you have kind of this arcing motion this way, and then opposite of that, because your body is so amazing, it can do so many cool things. To counterbalance this, the back leg kind of curves, has this general gesture to it, because you have your big muscle is on the back, which is your calf muscle. And you don't have much muscle at all in the front. In fact, you can kind of feel your muscle, or sorry, you feel your bone if you tap down on your legs there. So you get the kind of this curve this way, and then the bottom here, of course, curves this way, down to your feet. Okay, so it's this really awesome set of balances that go all the way down. Okay, now to do the arms, the elbow kind of juts right here and marks, and you can see how your rib cage ends above this, but when I draw it, the elbow is about right there as well. So you got your elbow, joins in right about there, and then I can connect those down here and create my cylinder. So I keep in mind that the arms are round, okay? Same thing on the woman's body here. Can make the arms that go down. Bring that out just a little bit. So yeah, you can see the head should be a little bit wider. Okay, then the forearm from here to your wrist is about a head long. You can kind of compare it to your head if you wanted to, but yeah, it's about that long there. So the wrist is going to be about right here. That falls in line with this fourth head, the halfway point. Okay, then I can make my cylinder to describe this. Now this takes a lot of practice. I can remember spending hours just practicing drawing these shapes to get them to look just right. So this takes a lot of practice and a lot of time to be able to get down. I am by no means an expert at this, but I just know enough just to be dangerous. Okay? Probably bring that rib cage in there just a little bit. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. Okay, now the hand from the wrist to the tip of the finger is about 3/4 the distance from your chin up. Okay, so about 3/4 from there to there is about your hand. So I will come down from this point here, about 3/4, put a little mark right there, a little mark right there. Okay, and that is where I draw the hand shape. Okay, about that long. Looking at it from the side, you get kind of just this little wedge shape, but if you look at it, of course, straight on, you get this little mitten shape. So to simplify the hand, it's just a mitten. I take all these fingers, join them all together, and draw it as a mitten. And of course, the thumb's going to stick out. Okay, I don't put a lot of detail into the hands and fingers. That's usually like the last little bits of detail. If you're trying to draw from a model, they're going to move their hands quite a bit, and so that's usually like the last thing I draw. because I don't want to put all my time and energy into drawing the fingers, and then because I've got some proportion here wrong, then I have to redraw it all. So I typically will wait for the very end and just draw them as a simple little mitten shape to get it down, okay? So hopefully this kind of helps you get started. Again, make sure you have your cheat sheet handy so you can see these proportions. And of course, it's going to be very, very different when you are trying to draw from a model, because these is not going to be as straightforward as this. But if you can simplify the legs into these different sections here and little segments and learn how to see them, then it's going to be a lot easier for you. But again, it takes lots and lots of practice. And so some people this comes really easy to, some people this doesn't. The most important thing I can tell you is to get the proportions of the torso correct first, okay? If the torso is wrong, the distance from chin down to the crotch there, if that's wrong, then everything else is going to be wrong, okay? But if this is right, and the hands, the arms and legs, they can be wrong, but it doesn't throw off the whole drawing. But if you get this wrong, it's going to throw off the whole drawing. And so before you move on to the legs and arms, make sure you count your head measurements, okay? Make sure you get that proportion correct, okay? The other thing I want to encourage you to do is make sure I've given you a big piece of paper. Use the whole piece of paper, okay? Do not draw little figures this big, okay? Little mistakes on a little drawing become big mistakes. Little mistakes on a big, sorry, did I say that wrong? Little mistakes on a little drawing become big mistakes. Throws everything off. On a big drawing, if you have a little mistake, it stays a little mistake. Okay, it's not that big a deal. So try to when you do these, draw the full sheet of your piece of paper. Okay? That way you can make these little adjustments here. Okay? So good luck. Try to draw this, and this is what you will turn in for your assignment.